the form of a slave, Philippians chapter 2 verses 6 and 7, who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Great stress is placed on the Greek word morph, or the word form, by Trinitarians and others like the Jehovah's Witnesses, who teach that Christ had a pre-human existence. It is argued that in the form of God means that Christ had the nature of God before his birth, and it was this which he sacrificed in coming to the earth to live as a human. If in the form of God means the very nature of God, then Christ could not have been very God while on earth, as Trinitarians claim, since this is what he is said to have sacrificed and left behind in coming to the earth when he emptied himself. The Greek word morph, translated form, does not refer to essential nature, as Trinitarians claim. This is proven by the following. Morph means form, shape, fine, beautiful form, figure, fashion, appearance, outward form. In the context of this passage, it is stated that Christ took upon him the form of a servant, or the form of a slave. But what is the form of a servant, a slave? The essential nature of a slave is the same as that of any other human being. The form, therefore, must refer to the outward form and demeanour of a slave as the distinguishing characteristic. The Greek word morph occurs in only one other place in the New Testament, Mark chapter 16 and verse 12, and here it clearly does not mean essential nature. Jesus appeared in another form, but this could not refer to a change of his essential nature, since the reason why he appeared to be in another form was because the disciples' eyes were held not to know him. Luke chapter 24 and verse 16. Not even a Trinitarian or a Jehovah's Witness would be prepared to say that Christ's essential nature was changed after his resurrection and glorification. How was Christ in the form of God? He had the demeanour of the Father mentally and morally. His character was the express image of his Father's person. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 3. Sometimes Trinitarians stress that Jesus was originally in the form of God. Being in the form of God is taken to mean that he was in fact very God before his incarnation. However, being in the form of God means being and continually to be in the form of God. Jesus never ceased to be in the form of God, since in outward form and demeanour from his birth he consistently represented his Father's character. Acts chapter 2 and verse 30. Therefore, being a prophet does not mean being originally before birth a prophet, but rather a prophet and continuing to be such. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 7. For as much as he is the image and glory of God, does not mean being originally before he was born the image and glory of God, but rather being the image of God and continuing to be. Galatians chapter 2 and verse 14. If thou being a Jew does not mean being originally before his birth as a Jew, but rather if you from the start and continuing to be a Jew. Thought it not robbery to be equal with God is generally acknowledged to be a poor translation. The Revised Standard Version reads as follows: He did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. Unlike Eve, who grasped after the fruit which was to be desired to make one like God, the Elohim or angels, to know good and evil, Jesus refused to take the kingdoms of the world without the crucifixion of the flesh and the declaration of the righteousness of his Father. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he subjected his will to his Father's, not arrogantly to himself. That right or privilege exclusively belonged to his Father. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 39. He, that is Jesus, went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. How did Jesus take the form of a servant or a slave? Two passages supply the answer. If I then, your master and Lord, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. John chapter 13 and verse 14. Though he were a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. Hebrews chapter 5 verses 8 and 9. Although Jesus was in the form of God, in his outward form and demeanour, he took on him the outward form and demeanour of a slave. He humbled himself, that is, he emptied himself, refers to Christ's deliberate choice to submit his will to that of his Father's. Jesus was worshipped. Matthew chapter 8 and verses 2 and chapter 9 and verse 18. Jesus was worshipped, performed the works of God. John chapter 10 and verse 37 and 38. Jesus forgave sins. Matthew chapter 9 and verse 2. But he never claimed authority to himself which had not been delegated to him by the Father. In so doing, his example was a powerful lesson in humility to the Philippians. But if Jesus, being originally before his birth, while he was in heaven, in the form essential nature of God, thought at his birth, when he descended into the womb, not to be equal with God, but left the form of God, where is humility demonstrated?